So when I saw this headline, I thought we should take a deeper dive into this because something here didn't make sense to me, right? And the story's about what they call gray divorce. So that's people over 50, over the age of 50, who are getting divorced, a number that's been rising, while at the same time, Canada at least, divorce rate here hit a 50-year low in 2020. So there's obviously a pretty large divergence here. We thought we'd try to find out why. Andrew Sofin's a psychotherapist focusing on couples and family and has been dealing, by the way, with this issue for more than 30 years. Mr. Sofin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let me go back and ask number one, the obvious question here, with the divorce rate going down in general and going up for people, what we call gray divorces, people over 50, what is the main reason here from what you understand?
Well, I mean, one of the main pieces, we're living longer. So that's obviously, think about 50 years ago, people definitely were not living as longer. And also people have more the means to do so than maybe before. So if you look a generation ago, a lot of times one spouse was probably very dependent on the other and would say, you know what, it's fine, we're staying married, it's fine. I don't need to really go off and realize my dreams. I'm fine with the sort of the status quo. Whereas now you've got people most of the time, 2 careers, 2 incomes, and a lot of times people are looking more for self-fulfillment than they were maybe a generation ago. So many people, once the kids have aged out and they're sort of looking at each other and going, wait a minute, okay, we're very good at raising kids, but you know what? I don't really want to spend my remaining years with you. I want to go off and do something that really interests me. So I think it's usually people looking inside and saying, I want something more in life.
You know, it's interesting. One of the quotes in the story that I read says, and I think you may have said this, is people tend to feel less sure of themselves as they age. And I would have thought exactly the opposite.
Well, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the research shows because we live in such a youth-obsessed culture, many people as they age will sort of compare themselves to the younger people that they see around them. And especially if you have somebody who's been, say, a stay-at-home parent where they don't have the additional piece of a career as part of their identity, they will see themselves as being less than in many ways because it's such a youth-obsessed culture and because you see the celebrities all the time. What was that? The football coach, Bill Belichick?
Yeah, with his 24-year-old girlfriend, yeah.
Right, so can you imagine if you're a woman in your 50s or 60s and you're seeing this? So in other words, if I get divorced, so my husband's going to be dating somebody like that, what about me? So I think that's where the insecurity comes from. It's usually from those who don't have a career or they've retired and that piece is no longer there. So there's insecurity as well around the career. So many people in sort of say big careers usually are going to get pushed out in their 50s, 60s, in favor of a younger generation. So they're losing their identity as well. So that's where I sort of say they're not as confident as they were, say, in their 30s or 40s.
Yeah, and that kind of serves as a trigger, I would think, at some point as well. This idea of, you've been working, suddenly you're retired, so you don't have that to be at all day long. Now you're spending more time with your spouse, with your significant other, and that's something you'd not had to do since maybe you got together at the beginning.
Well, right. It's going almost back to dating.
Right.
And you can imagine if you've raised kids and a whole family, maybe that's been a 30-year arc. Obviously, you're going to be different than you were back when, say, you're in your 20s or early 30s when you were starting. And you're going to look at the other person, and I mean, obviously, people grow, and you might not be the same people you were. Well, obviously, you're not the same people as you were. And you might really say, you know what? We had a good run. Dating was, great. Getting married was great. We did really well raising the kids, but, maybe one person wants to spend their sort of, as I say, golden years, off at a cottage on the lake and relaxing, reading books, and the other one wants to travel the world.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily, it's not a good or bad. It's more recognizing where you're at that stage of life.
Yeah.
And gone are the days where the woman just does what the man says. That's a big difference, too, that I see. It's people having more self-confidence in themselves to say, you know what, I do want something different, and I can do it.
It's interesting to note here, just statistically, right? In 1986, the average age people got married was about 25. In 2020, the average age is now about 31. Yeah. So you were staying together longer. You got married much younger. So maybe it kind of makes sense that at some point, you'd want to call it a day.
Yeah. And because people are living so much longer too, many people are looking at the quote unquote golden years as something, as a whole nother chapter. It's not if you think about a generation ago, it's okay, I'm going to be at a senior's home and that's it.
Right.
Whereas many people are saying, no, well, look at the ads. What are some of the ads, that are targeted at, seniors? And I remember there was one with a woman with gray hair and she's carrying a surfboard. It's even the media and the advertising is focusing on very active senior lifestyle.
Yeah, it's that idea that it's not so much the end of one thing as the beginning of another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I would ask one other thing, and I found this quite fascinating as well in the story. So, after this great divorce, what tends to happen, I think more, maybe you can just sort of clarify this. So what happens is the men maybe seek out another relationship, but women more often than not do not.
Yeah, and we still live in a very patriarchal culture where generally it's more accepted for a man to be dating somebody much younger, whereas there is still a taboo about a woman dating somebody much younger. So most of the time you'll see the men start turning around, and also what do they see in the media around them? Al Pacino, Bill Belichick, all of these different people with, Mick Jagger, all of that stuff. So the messaging is very much for the men. Oh, well, I can have another relationship with somebody 20 years my junior. And I find a lot of the women, especially if they've been stay-at-home parents, they're like, I'm done with taking care of people. I do not want another guy that I have to take care of. And especially if I'm looking at somebody the same age as me, I don't want to go into another phase where I'm just taking care of another person. And so they tend to sort of go more for friendship circles of, hanging out with their best friends, going on trips with their friends, and sort of saying, you know what, I'm fine like this. I mean, obviously, this is a generalization. It's not true for every single person, but this is more anecdotal, and you see in more of the research that the men definitely tend to lean towards getting in another relationship.
I have to wrap up. I would just ask one last question. Sure. Do you see this trend continuing? Is there some reason to think it won't?
I think it's going to continue. It definitely, I think it will continue, especially as people live longer and the stigma of being active in old age is gone. It's gone.
All right. We leave it at that. I find this fascinating. Mr. Sofin, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Take care. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Andrew Sofin, psychotherapist. It's called Great Divorce. On an increase in Canada, despite the general divorce rate going down, more people over 50 are getting divorced than ever before.